All Indiana Politics
is your premier source for Indiana politics.
focusing on issues that matter to you.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage, exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders, expert analysis on critical legislation. From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Your day moves fast. Your news should too. That's why there's a new and improved Wish TV app, bringing you more local news, breaking alerts, live streaming, weather forecast, radar, and Indiana sports, all in one place. Customize your news feed to see the stories that matter most to you and get the information you need when you need it. Download the new and improved Wish TV app today on iOS or Android and take News 8 with you everywhere.
Welcome back to another episode of All Indiana Politics Conversations. I'm your host, Garrett Bergquist, the producer of All Indiana Politics, and with us once again, Fishers Mayor Scott Fadness. Mayor, welcome back.
Thank you.
So in part one of our conversation, we alluded to this, but I want to drill really deep into this issue. You played a very pivotal role in turning Fishers from a town into a city. Now, we're going to get a little bit nerdy here because this is going to involve some actions of state law here. So let's go ahead and start with that. In simple terms, what are the key differences here in Indiana between what a town can do and what a city can do?
Yeah, it really comes down to your form of government. So under a town form of government, you will have an elected town council, and that town council will appoint someone to run the day-to-day operations. But that person's not elected. They're appointed. So they serve at the pleasure of the town council. It's almost like a corporate board for a CEO of a company. In a city in Indiana, and Indiana is unique in this way, Indiana has a very strong mayor form of government. So if you're a second or third class city, you have a mayor. And in a second class city in Indiana, the mayor has a significant amount of authority given to them by Indiana law. So you still have a city council, but the city council really only has a few main functions. One, they approve the budget. Two, they pass laws. And three, they do zoning. They make decisions on rezones and things of that nature. But the mayor hires and fires all employees. The mayor, once the budget is approved, has the authority and autonomy to spend the money in the way that they see fit. The mayor sets the agenda. The mayor is the ambassador or spokesperson for the city. And so in a lot of ways, it's a much more concentrated level of executive authority in a city form of government than a town form of government here in Indiana.
And I do want to draw that baseline here. I want to be very specific, particularly for listeners who are outside of Indiana. Here in Indiana, it's what we refer to as strong mayor. The mayor handles all the day-to-day executive duties. This is different from, like, I've worked in states like Missouri and North Carolina where the mayor was more of a ceremonial
It's like a weak mayor form of government. Yes,
right, and
absolutely.
it was mostly city manager. So same in Illinois where I grew up too. So what are some problems that the limitations of town government caused for Fishers in those last few years?
Well, I think, and I'm kind of a unique animal in that I've lived in both. Most city managers will never cross over to the political realm because, in fact, as a city manager, you're not allowed to claim a political affiliation. You're not allowed to be involved in any campaigns. You have to stay very agnostic to the political process. You serve whoever gets elected. And so I lived in that environment for many years, or for a number of years, and then transitioned to a city. I think for any community, and I've talked to a number of communities in Indiana that are contemplating what should we be? Should we be a town? Should we be a city? And I always tell them the pros and cons are fairly straightforward. In a town form of government, what you get is more consistency long-term because it takes longer time to build consensus among the council. I mean, the council really has to drive the decisions of the community. And so you're going to talk about 5 or 7 people having to get into some level of agreement before they do anything. So there's a consistency that comes with that. In a city form of government, you have one individual that has significant amounts of authority. So they have more of an opportunity to drive an agenda and move the community in a particular direction. Depending upon your thoughts on limited government versus a stronger executive authority, it just depends on what your preference is. They both have pros and cons, in my opinion, and it also is dependent upon who's in those offices. If you have a town council that has an aligned vision and they have a common view of where the community can go, they can move very quickly with a town manager. On the flip side, if you have a mayor that's a terrible mayor that doesn't have a vision and doesn't have really the ability to execute on that, you're probably not going to do well either. Both forms of government can function, but there are systemic pros and cons depending upon which one you choose.
How and when did conversations first begin about changing Fishers from a town to a city?
We were growing very fast as a population, and there was a group of residents who I think got a little bit upset with the town council at the time and said, you know what, I think it's time for us to become a city. And this was when we were probably 65,000 people, maybe 70,000. We were the largest town in the state. And there was this deep sense that they wanted one person. They wanted one leader that they could point to and say, well, you're in charge. I can hold you accountable. I want to know what your vision is for the city. And they went to a referendum to vote on this issue. And it was during a presidential election. I think it might have been Obama's first election, I believe. And the community pretty resoundingly voted that they wanted to have a city form of government. They wanted a strong mayor form of government. I think if I had to guess what was in the minds of the voters at that time, I think it was this idea of I want to hold someone accountable for the city. Not 9 people, but I want one person I know who's in charge. And I want them to have a vision. I want them to drive the city forward. I want the mayor to drive the city forward. And so they voted pretty overwhelmingly to become a city.
Tell me about your role in those discussions.
It was painfully awkward because they needed someone, the community needed someone that they could trust that would provide an objective view of the pros and cons of both forms of government, because most people don't sit around thinking about forms of local government. And so at the time I was a town manager, the town council said, well, Scott should do it. So I had to go to all of these community meetings night after night and stand in front of a crowd of residents and basically talk to them about the pros and cons of my existence. Should I be in my role as town manager or not? And I would have to answer questions about, well, that's a great point. Maybe a mayor would be better in these scenarios than a town manager. And at the time, I had no desire or interest in being the mayor. I just thought it was my job and my responsibility to help the town through the transition, and then I would move on to another community.
What changed your mind?
2 things. During my time as town manager, I had transitioned a number of leadership roles in the organization. I had built a really, really great team of people. And I had sold them on this vision of what we could create, and they were believers in what we could do. And I didn't feel right about walking in and saying, you know what, good luck with whoever becomes mayor, I'm out of here. It didn't feel right. And secondly, I had really, in my head, developed a fairly clear vision of what I thought Fishers could become. And we had just started pulling the levers on that. I mean, we had just started to scratch the surface of what was the potential of Fishers. And I didn't feel right leaving that. And so I talked to my wife one night and I said, if I stay in the city manager role and move around, I have a pretty good idea of what our life will look like and what my career could look like. And it's good. It's a great opportunity. If I've listened to my internal thoughts about these 2 things that are driving me, I feel like I need to go this other path, which is to run for mayor. And I said, but the problem with that is if I lose, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And secondly, if I win, I really don't know what that means for us long term, because keep in mind, I didn't grow up dreaming about being elected to office. I wasn't one of those kids that's like, someday I'm going to be a congressman. That just wasn't in my DNA. And to my wife's credit, she said, I think you need to follow your gut instinct here and run. And at this time, I had never claimed a political party. I had never been around a campaign. I'd never been to a campaign event. I didn't know what a campaign fundraiser was. I had no idea. I mean, so when I decided to run for mayor, you're looking at a guy that, other than having to work for politicians and frankly not really caring much for the politicians I've met in my life, I was about to enter into politics.
I understand that Fishers at one point kicked around the idea of pursuing a modified city
Correct.
status. Yeah, what happened there?
The town council at the time wanted to come up with a compromised version. They had this new state law called a reorganization statute that basically allowed communities to rethink their form of government in any way that they saw fit. And so they came up with a model that looked a little bit like what Zionsville ended up with, which was they had a mayor, but they would limit the person's authority. It was kind of more of a weak mayor form of government. And ultimately the residents just said, no, we want to be like these other cities. We want a strong mayor. We want a clear vision, and they voted it down.
What lessons do you think Fishers' experience holds for other towns considering city status? Like, for example, I know right now there's some chatter in Brownsburg about whether or not to do that.
Yeah. I think there are lessons to be learned, both structurally and then also, we made that transition fairly seamlessly, I think, partly because we made it very intentional that the council and the mayor's office were going to work together. It wasn't going to be one of these opportunities where when I became mayor, all of a sudden I was going to look at the city council, who used to be my employers, and say, well, from now on, I'm in charge and you're no longer relevant. That was never the intent. It was a team effort. And so there was a lot of work early on making sure, okay, we may disagree about different things, but we're all going to be on the same page about where the city's trying to go. And we're all going to be respectful of each other's roles. And we've tried to adhere to that over the years. And my staff knows that, like, our city council is an important part of our team. And it isn't adversarial in any way. And I think that's been really critical so that you don't end up, like, creating this new form of government and all of a sudden you just have these ridiculous tensions between the executive and legislative branch. They need to work together. Even if they don't agree on everything, there needs to be open lines of communication and some consensus built so that you can keep moving the city forward.
And that's a good place to leave off, because when we come back, we're going to talk about one particular big project you worked on, and that was the State Road 37 project. For now, Mayor Fadness, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.